Okay.
Just a couple more moments. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to this virtual meeting of the Audit Committee. My name is Peter Marriott. I'm the chairman of this meeting, and I'm supported this evening by officers Gail Beaton, who's the Internal Audit Manager, Graham Clark, Strategic Director, and Fiona Cameron, who's the Democratic Services Manager, and she will be clerking this meeting. I'll read the next bit out. We've heard it many times. Members and officers, please use the hand raise function within Zoom to indicate that you wish to speak. Please keep yourself on mute when you are not speaking. Please can I also ask that any questions are kept brief and to the point. If any members in the meeting lose their connection temporarily, we will pause to allow them time to rejoin. And if the webcast stream fails, then we will also have to adjourn it until we're able to reset the connection. Okay, thank you. That completes that introduction. I should say, particularly to welcome to John Gray, who brings to the meeting a lot of experience. I'm very pleased about that. Also, John Roberts and Mark Bartlett from Grant Thornton. Okay, let's move on to item 1, which is the minutes of the last meeting. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th July 2020, which are published on the council website? They are correct. Can we confirm that?
Yeah, agreed. Confirmed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 2, apologies for absence. Do we have any, Fiona?
Yes, Chairman, we've got apologies from Councillor Floyd Douglas and Councillor Michaela Gray.
Thank you. Item 3 is disclosure of interests. Can you advise on that, Fiona?
I've not received any declarations in advance of the meeting, Chairman, so unless anyone has anything to declare now, there are no declarations.
Okay, thank you. Item 4, questions by members of the public.
No questions from members of the public and no questions from members either, which is item 5.
Okay, thank you. Moving on now to item 6, the audit action log. That is pages 1 to 2 of the pack. So are there any updates on the outstanding actions?
Well, I think the only outstanding item is the discussion on the property investment strategy. I don't know if Graham Clark would like to just, or Peter Vickers would like to just report on the, or I'm sorry, have you had that discussion on the 21st of July?
We had the risk register discussion on the 21st, at least session 2. There's still one more to go on that one.
Right.
And on the 7th of August, yeah. So.
I think the property investment strategy discussion is still outstanding.
Okay.
Chairman, it's Graham. Just on that point, I know it's something that members wanted to, of this committee, wanted to look at the governance aspects of that. I think one of the reasons it was put back was because there hasn't been any, we haven't made any acquisitions for a while actually, but the Investment Advisory Board has been meeting and a new strategy was agreed by Council in February. And the portfolio holder reported to Value for Money Overview and Scrutiny recently that he was looking to revise the strategy in the light of our new financial position and the current economic conditions for as context for property investment at the moment. Now, this committee can look at that aspect of governance at any time. I think when we met as part of the risk, you thought it would be a good idea to hold fire until the point when a revised strategy came up in case the governance arrangements changed. But clearly it's for members to decide when you want to have a look at that and exactly what you'd like to look at. And then Peter Vickers and I can support you in that process.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. I mean, would that be something we will pick up on this third session of the risk meetings?
I think that would be a good idea, Chairman. And you've got a sort of a verbal update item on the agenda tonight, and that's where I think Peter and I are looking for a steer from members on how you'd like to take that forward. So by all means, come back to the property item there and perhaps suggest that we, that be one of the feature items.
Okay, thank you. Okay, does that complete item 6 then? I think it does. So moving on to item 7, which is the Audit Committee Annual Activity Report. That's on pages 3 to 12. Sorry, Fiona.
Sorry. Gail has got her hand up, and also Councillor Seaborn.
Sorry, beg your pardon. Gail.
Yes, I can confirm the second item regarding the internal audit costed audit plan. I did circulate that after the previous audit committee in July, but I have also included that in Annex 1 of the progress on the audit plan on page 301, paragraph 8, which we can come to later.
Okay, thank you. And so Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. It's really good to see this action log. It's not something we've made much of in the past in audit, but it's good. Since it was there, I read the rest of the papers and kept my eyes open, or kept my working eye open for other action items that might actually appear in this. And I did happen to note that under agenda item 7, section 6 this evening, risk management, we did agree that the committee would arrange for the findings of the air quality issue to be shared with heads of service, so that it wasn't just kept within the one department, but all the lessons were shared. So this action log showing stuff we've completed as well as stuff that's ongoing. I think it might be worth just recording that because it was quite an important action. And we also state under agenda item 8 that the report follows on from an outstanding action for the Audit Committee to review its own terms of reference. So we're clearly embarking on that, but it's probably something that ought to appear in the action log so that we complete it. So just as observation, it's great to see this action log, and let's keep it fully populated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, with that and that sort of scope, we did talk about the data management issues that Gail was going to share that with heads of service to see if there are any outstanding items there that we should be considering. Is there anything you'd like to say on that one, Gail?
No, not at this point, because I am carrying out a review on that, and I have to circulate to all the, not just heads of service, but service managers, looking at those areas where there's one person responsible for a given area.
Should we include that as one of the action items?
Well, you could do, but it is already included within the audit plan itself.
Yeah, I mean, there are many things that appear in the annual programmes, that things we do all the time. So I guess this action log specifically would pick up things which are outside of that general annual programme, I guess. We're looking at more unusual items. Okay.
As the chairman.
Yeah, okay, well, that's fine, thank you. Right, okay, moving on then to, what are we now? The item 7, the Audit Committee Annual Activity Report. Are there any comments on this?
Chairman, just to introduce this, it's an annual report that we produce that largely is a summary of what the committee has looked at over the previous year and sort of highlighting particular actions and points that have been discussed. So it should be a largely factual statement of activity. It's just a question of whether there's anything that you feel has been omitted from that statement that you would like to see included.
Yes, I mean, I did notice on the very top of the item, we've got the report dated 2020 to 21, presumably it's the previous year we're discussing here.
Yes, yes, it would be.
Yeah, I have one comment on section 1.3 on the application of the habitats regulation. I think this will come up a bit later on, so I won't make any comment about this now, but we have addressed aspects of the habitats regulations in previous meetings. At the moment, I wouldn't have said that was a sort of a robust issue. That there are some outstanding aspects of that I'd like to sort of cover at the appropriate time. Are there any other comments on this item? No. Okay. Can I therefore ask the committee note this? Okay, noted.
Noted.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 8, which is the review of the audit terms of reference, pages 13 to 110. Fiona, I think you will outline this report.
Yes, and sorry for it being so long, but I thought that it was worth including the guidance 2018 in with this, because it's very significant. As Councillor Seaborn highlighted, this is an item that's carried over from the previous audit committee, and there have been a number of discussions about the terms of reference of the committee, and it's timely that Councillor Gray is back on the committee as well, because a lot of those discussions were led by Councillor Gray and Councillor Seaborn. And one of the particular issues was a perceived lack of clarity between the roles of the audit committee and overview and scrutiny, and in particular the value for money overview and scrutiny committee. And we had there was some discussions actually in audit committee and also some offline discussions around that. The SIP for guidance actually highlights the confusion between audit committee and scrutiny as something of a common problem for audit committees. And their response to that is that that sort of signifies that there's probably a lack of clarity in the terms of reference of either the audit committee and or the scrutiny committee, that's not providing that sort of clear distinction in roles. And for the members who did the SIPFA online training, I think back in July, and I seem to recall Councillor Marriott, you attended that, and also Councillor Davidson and Councillor Seaborn. They did just put up a slide where they tried to clarify the distinction between audit committee, which has a focus on risk and control issues and focuses on enablers of governance and financial management and internal controls, and the scrutiny function, which is focused more on outcomes and policy effectiveness and involves consultation with users and the public. So one of the sort of purposes that of looking at the terms of reference now is to try and address that sort of lack of clarity in the terms of reference. And the SIP for guidance includes model terms of reference for local authority audit committees in an appendix, and that seems to be a good starting point. So I did a bit of a comparison between our current terms of reference, which are included, I think, as Annex 1, and the model code, or the model terms of reference. And sort of as you would expect, there's a lot of sort of crossover, a lot of direct mapping. If anything, I would say the SIPFA model terms of reference are more detailed in a number of areas, particularly around the statement of purpose of the committee. It does make very explicit reference to the committee having oversight of internal and external audit functions, which our current terms of reference don't refer to in the statement of purpose. The core functions map fairly well, but again, I would say that the model terms of reference are slightly more detailed in the way that they're set out. The model terms of reference also talk about a possible slightly broader scope of the audit committee, and one of the things that they refer to the fact that some audit committees include in their remit standards and ethics functions, which are currently covered by Waverley's Standards Committee, but they also highlight oversight of the Treasury management framework as being something that could fall within the audit committee terms of reference. That currently goes to our Value for Money Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So that's something that the audit committee might want to comment on. The other area that's of interest is around the independence of the audit committee and the membership. And the SIPFA model terms of reference do specifically say that, or suggest as best practice, that the audit committee should be independent of the executive, which our audit committee is, but also independent of scrutiny. Now, at the moment, our audit committee, only Councillor Floyd Douglas is not on at least one of the overview and scrutiny committees. And everybody else is on at least one, if not more, or a substitute on one, as well as being a full member on another. So if the committee was minded to try and create a bit more separation between audit committee and scrutiny, that's something that it would be quite difficult to do sort of in the short term, because we'd need to follow that through with the membership of the overview and scrutiny committees. But it is something that if you felt was important as the key governance committee of the council, that would carry a lot of weight, and we would have to consider how we can work towards sort of separating the membership of those committees. The other interesting point around membership is the recommendation of having an independent member, which Waverley doesn't currently have, and to the best of my recollection, we've never had an independent member of the audit committee. So there were some specific sort of issues around membership that I would very much appreciate the audit committee's views on. The other recommendation sort of follows on from the SIPFA guide on best practice, and that's in relation to the audit committee evaluating its own effectiveness and its own performance as an audit committee. And given that you're now sort of 15 months in from starting off as a new committee last May, that would seem to be a good time for a little bit of self-evaluation, self-reflection, perhaps in an informal setting rather than a formal council meeting. And that would help inform what sort of briefings you as members want over the sort of the next year, year and a half, and what sort of training we might get external trainer in for, possibly SIPFA, for example. So a little bit of sort of navel gazing, if you like, but there's a structure for that in the SIPFA guidance that means that it's a structured process to consider how you're operating.
Thank you, Fiona. I mean, it does seem to me this is a very thick document. The reference document goes to nearly 100 pages or so. is it worth looking at this in a separate meeting, perhaps with some guidance from yourself about which issues or which aspects of their guidance we should be taking special note of? You know, I just think that there's a lot there to consider, and it would be useful to have both Richard and John's input into that, as you've just summarised, to get a sort of first-hand view from where they started and where we might go from this point.
That's certainly an option. It is quite a detailed subject. I have got a few hands up, Chairman. John Roberts, and then yes, Councillor Gray and Councillor Goodridge, who had registered to speak on this item. So you might just want to have a bit of discussion and then see how members want to take it.
Okay, thank you. Should we start? Top of the list is John Roberts. John.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just to draw the committee's attention to the fact that Sir Tony Redmond reported his formal review to the Secretary of State on local audit last week. And in that report, he does deal with the matter of audit committees, and he does make the recommendation about independent members, that all audit committees should have an independent member. And he also talks about training arrangements. So a self-assessment would help to, to help you to sort of tailor your training arrangements and training plans properly, which would all be very consistent with the findings from the Redmond review in this area. The only other observation I had was just looking at the terms of reference, the current terms of reference for external audit on page 20. They're actually quite a way off the SIPFA suggested terms of reference for external auditors on page 91 of the agenda pack. So I welcome that, the suggestion to do a more sort of detailed review, because I think there's probably scope there to make some changes.
Thank you, John. Are you suggesting perhaps if we have another meeting just to look at this aspect, that we start off with the Redmond report before we go into the detailed SIPFA?
We would be happy to give you an update on the Redmond review, with to present what his main findings were and where next that's likely to go. Clearly, it's a formal government review, so it's important. But there is now a period of reflection and a period of legislation as well in some areas that will mean that his findings will take a number of years to implement. So it's important that the committee knows about it, but it's also important that the committee doesn't wait on those findings, I think.
Okay, thank you. Fiona, maybe could I ask the committee if that's something we would welcome to have that discussion in a meeting sometime fairly soon, I guess. What would members?
We can put something in fairly soon. I've still got Councillor Gray and Councillor Goodridge indicating that they'd like to speak. Okay, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one point of clarification. I'm not on any ONS committees. I was on environmental ONS, but I came off that. So there are two people who aren't on ONS committees. As Fiona mentioned at the beginning, we did some work on terms of reference and overlaps, and I think there were some important issues this committee needs to discuss on what exactly is the role of the Audit Committee in respect of governance. The areas of overlap with ONS and the areas of overlaps that concerned us back then is it was difficult to know whether a paper would actually come to the the value for money ONS company, go straight to the executive or go to the audit, or in fact, in some cases, go to both committees. There was also an issue with standards, and when standards were made responsible for the Constitution, it caught things like the terms of reference now cannot go back from the Audit Committee direct to full council. It actually has to go back through the Standards Committee. In the papers, it suggests that whatever we discuss should go forward to the Governance Working Party. Well, I, for one, I've heard nothing about this for over 12 months. I was aware that there was one being set up, and I was just curious to know what their role and responsibility was going to be. And I think just helping you, Chairman, my view would be we should have quite an extensive discussion. Although there's 103 pages, they're quite relevant. They need to be read if we're going to discuss the terms of reference. So I thank Fiona for putting them in. And yes, I've probably got a sore left eye as well as Councillor Seaborn in having read through them, but I have read them, but I think we should have a more detailed discussion, Mr. Chairman, to take this very important topic forward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak at your meeting. I did indicate I wanted to speak on this item and also item 13, but I don't think item 13 is relevant for what I want to say, so I just want to speak on this item, if I may. I say it from my position as Vice Chairman of the Standards Committee. And standards, of course, are mentioned quite a lot in the recommendation and in the report. I too wanted, I accept entirely that we need to review the terms of reference of the Audit Committee. There has been discomfort between overview and scrutiny and audit, and there's been discomfort, if I might put it that way, between audit and standards, with matters in the last 12 months, which I felt as Vice Chairman of Standards should have come to us on one aspect of what was decided by audit. And therefore it's a good idea. I too wanted to know about the governance review working group, because I don't know the constitution of that group, and I don't know whether Fiona can tell us in due course, but it seems to me that it should, bearing in mind audit is free of the executive, that overview and scrutiny committees are free of the executive, and that standards committee is limited, I think, to one member of the executive. This should be something which audit and standards in some way should discuss between them to agree the way forward, which would kill two birds with one stone, rather than going to a governance review working party, particularly if the membership of that working party has lots of people on the executive. It's not really for the executive to decide the terms of reference of independent committees that are existing. So I would be interested in a view as to the correctness of it going to a governance review working party, if that working party has quite a lot of members of the executive on it. And I do think that I'm aware, of course, that in 2018, as mentioned by Councillor Gray, certain suggestions by the then audit committee was going to be considered, but hasn't been yet. I don't think a joint committee of standards and audit would work. I think standards committee at the moment are responsible for the constitution, they're responsible for ethics, they're responsible for if people should transgress, both on the borough and in parish councils, where we get involved and resolve the issue. So I think the Standards Committee has an interest in your discussions, if I might put it that way. And it might be more streamlined if we, as you suggest, Mr. Chairman, is you have a special meeting about it and maybe invite one or two members. I mean, you are on the Standards Committee, so you could have two hats on at once. And maybe the Chairman and Vice Chairman of Standards Committee be invited. Just a thought, so that the two committees can sort out how they think matters should proceed. I know the Standards Committee are meeting at the end of this month sometime, and it'll be on our agenda too, this, I think, reading the report. So it would be helpful, I think, to see what the Audit Committee's view is on such a suggestion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich. I think your suggestion is very sensible. Fiona, could you start setting up a meeting then initially, I think if John or one of the Grant Thornton team could provide a presentation on Redmond report as part of that. I don't know how far we can take all this in one session, but I think from my point of view, I'd like to get the basic facts sorted on SIPCA, and then move on to the more complicated question of how we deal or interact with the other committees.
Yes, I can do that, Chairman. And just to respond to the points that Councillor Gray and Councillor Goodridge made about the governance group review working group. That isn't, I think it was quite a large group, maybe 8 to 10 members. It was quite heavily weighted towards Standards Committee, but only 2 executive members, I think, off the top of my head. And it is a cross-party group, and they're not appointing members to committees. It was things like sort of the issue of Audit Committee and Standards Committee having potential overlaps. The fact that if we did want to create separation between Audit Committee and the Overview and Scrutiny Committees, that obviously is going to have a knock-on effect in terms of potentially the number of Overview and Scrutiny Committees. If you suddenly take 8 members out of the membership of the Scrutiny Committees, then it's going to become even harder than it is currently to have 4 committees of 9 members plus substitutes. If none of those can be Audit Committee members and none of them can be executive members. So it's the purpose of the governance review working group was more to look at the structure as a whole rather than just looking at the terms of reference of individual committees. But having an offline meeting and certainly bringing in some Standards Committee members to look at the terms of reference of Audit Committee and Standards Committee, that's fine, and we can arrange that. Councillor Wilson has his hand up.
Yes, I think Jerome as well. Okay, that's Councillor Wilson.
It was just to tell you that Councillor Davidson was trying to attract your attention, but I think Fiona has picked it up.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Chairman. In fact, what I was going to say had been pretty well been covered already by Councillors Gray and Goodridge, both of whose suggestions I fully support. I would add that it might also be helpful not only to have the inclusion of the Standards Committee because of the overlap, the potential overlap on terms of reference, but also the VFM, the Value for Money ONS committee representation as well, because as I think Councillor Gray pointed out in his introduction, that has been also in the past has also been an area of potential conflicting overlap. Clearly, if we change our terms of reference within this Audit Committee, they're going to have a knock-on impact in the terms of reference of these other 2 committees. So their involvement I think, is essential.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so if members are happy, let us set up at least the first meeting to deal with the SIPCA document. And then, do you think, Fiona, it would be too much to add in these other issues about the interaction with the ONS meetings? Do you think that would be a separate session?
I think probably we have to play it by ear a little bit and see whether that just sort of falls out of the discussion around the SIPCA terms of reference, or can be sort of wrapped up in that, and perhaps sort of towards the end of a meeting, see whether we need to have another one. Okay,
let's do it that way then. Thank you. I do have a question on this, in a general question. We talk about SIPCA terms of reference for the audit terms of reference, but there's also the public sector internal audit standards. How do they correspond, or are they involved? Are they included as part of SIPCA?
I would have to refer to Gail, I think, on that one. Gail, do you want to comment on that?
Of the public sector internal audit and standards generally refer to the work that's completed by internal audit, but it is something I will actually have a look into to see whether it does actually touch on the terms of reference of an actual audit committee. But my understanding, it relates to how internal audit should complete internal audits and complying with those standards. But I will check that out, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other comments on this item?
I've got no more hands up, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Then, in that case, can I ask the committee to note this item? Noted?
Noted.
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 Noted. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on then to item 8. So this is the review of the audit terms of reference. And Fiona, again, you were going to outline this.
No, that's the one we've just done, Chairman. So we're on to 9, I think.
Beg your pardon. So the risk management item, item 9. And I think Peter Vickers was going to update us on this.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is a follow-on from the informal session we had looking at the corporate strategic risk register that sits behind the delivery of the corporate plan, which we did on the 17th of August. So there were some key themes that came out of the review. It was quite a comprehensive review that the membership did on the register. So the key things that came out of that were a lot more detail around business continuity, the impact of unitary planning, issues around COVID escalation, the risks that we're running there. And in a wider scale, we were looking at the actual heat matrix that we use to score the risks and how that can interplay in a more intuitive way to inform which risks need closer attention, management by exception, really. And one of the things that came out of that is that we really need to be bringing in a new risk domain within our risk appetite statement. We have 5 already, and we considered because we have the climate emergency, it would be appropriate to bring in the environmental impact risk domain to express the risk appetite around that particular issue that we deal with right across the board within the emergency. So the plan is to get together again as a committee in early August, once we've taken into account all of the points that came out of the last meeting. There were quite a few observations that were made. So the plan is to get back together in October once those are completed and have done the rounds with the heads of service, to enable the committee to look again at the risk register and also align it to more in line with the emerging corporate plan that's coming out. So it's a work in progress. It's something the committee's alive to, which is really useful. So it's good for governance in the organisation. And progress is happening on that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. Is there anything else anybody wants to add to this item? Nope. Okay. In that case, we've had the update. Thank you, Peter. Let's move on to item 10 then, which is the audit finding report. This is page 111, 142. And I think, Mark, you're going to outline the report.
If I may, Chair, I'll introduce it, and Mark will build on my comments.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have here the audit findings report, which has been prepared in accordance with our reporting responsibilities for you, and it's a comprehensive report, but it's also an incomplete report, and it's important for us to discuss what that means in terms of where the audit goes from here. The audit has been undertaken pretty much entirely through remote working, as we've been observing the lockdown and social distancing arrangements around required through COVID. And this is an observation that I would share across all our portfolio. The technology works. The technology works by way of communications. It works by way of sharing information in a secure manner, but audits do take longer. We've set out in the report all the extra things that we've done as part of the audit to tailor the work that we've done in accordance with the risk framework that we get through working in this way. But it is a pretty painstaking process that we're finding is taking probably up to 25% longer across the whole of our portfolio, and that would be the same for private sector work and work in the public sector. So we're not where we would have liked to have been at this point in time, but we have made progress in all sort of the key areas, and I'll explain what that means now. So the list that's on, I think, 113 of your agenda pack sets out quite a few sort of bullet points of work still in progress. Now, that list is coming down. It has come down since we compiled it. Also, within that list, you've got to look at where are the sort of the key areas that are likely to have a bearing on your reported position, how much work we've actually done across those areas, and you know, how much is left to finalisation. And in a lot of those points, it's just left for us to finalise our procedures. So I'm not anticipating any particular problems around that. So we've not found anything that will, as yet, impact on your general fund position. We are well advanced on our VFM work, and we're proposing an qualified conclusion on VFM, so that's a good finding. Also, ongoing concern, we've got no issues that we'd want to bring to your attention, and on the reporting requirements more broadly around the annual governance statement, no issues there. So where it boils down to is two main areas of the accounts where we've struggled in progressing the audit. So the first one is pensions. Pensions is a complicated area. The defined benefit pension scheme and the disclosures that you're required to make around those, and the evidence that you get to support those disclosures, working through the pension fund and through the actuary to the pension fund. So that has progressed, but there's been a national issue that's similar to the national issue that we had last year around McLeod. That's re-emerged, and we still need to do some work around that. Now that's not just a Surrey-wide issue. That's a national issue, so that's reflected in the report as it is across a number of our audits. Then the bigger issue, I think, is the issue around property valuations, and there were some issues with the audit last year on property valuations, if you recall, and there was a recommendation made in this report around the sort of the management of that piece of information. So it's a difficult area for the audit, certainly. It's made more difficult by the COVID arrangements, as I've said. Also, by the nature of the subject matter, it's a highly technical area where you get expertise from within the authority, your own valuer, to help with the information that you provide. But that information needs to be evidenced back. You've also, I believe, had some changes in personnel there. So, consistent again with what we found at a number of audits, the property valuation side of the audit has proved difficult. You'll see some pages around the estimates, pages around the significant risks and how we've dealt with them and what we've found to date, which is some material changes there. What I should stress, though, in this area is that it doesn't flow through to the bottom line. It doesn't impact on the general fund. So that gives a degree of confidence and should give the committee a degree of confidence. There is work still to be done in this area, and we are liaising. We still have very good, very strong working arrangements with the finance team, and we're liaising well around that. But at this point in the audit, I couldn't say if that wouldn't result in any further changes to the accounts. So we're not as well advanced as we'd like to be. There are different courses of action that we could now take from this point. I can pause for a minute to reflect on the report, and Mark can maybe help with fleshing out some more observations if you have questions. But I think then it's important for us to sort of plan out, you know, the actions to finalise this year's audit. The good news is that we have until the end of November. The Secretary of State has extended the audit reporting timetable to the end of November, which is plenty of time. We have plenty of time, but you know, we want to make sure that we get these last stages of the audit right.
John, do you want to move over to Mark in that case to do some of the details?
Thank you, Chairman. So I think John's really covered the headline pages of the report. So if I just take members through a bit more of the detail, just to as you said, flesh out a few of the areas. It's probably just worth clarifying on page 115 of your packs. We just set out our approach to materiality. So the materiality that was set out in the original audit plan that we brought to you in April, that has changed slightly, but that's just to reflect the figures within the draft financial statements. So we've got a table on the page there that confirms that materiality is actually lower than we'd originally had in the audit plan. And trivial matters, for anyone who's not familiar with that terminology, is that's the threshold above which we'll bring matters to members' attention. So the next few pages of the excuse me, of the report really mirror what we had in our audit plan and the audit plan addendum that set out the significant audit risks that we'd identified and what we intended to do about them. These pages then cover what we have actually done. So John's mentioned on page 116, COVID-19, that has impacted obviously the whole way the audit has been carried out, and also the way the finance team have been working throughout this process. So it was no mean feat for the finance team to get the financial statements out in the timescale that they did. And while we've had identified some improvements to the council's arrangements, we have been able to carry out the audit remotely, as John said, and the technology has worked in that respect. And we've got no implications for our audit report arising from COVID-19. The next page, 117, picks up on two assumed risks under the international standards for auditing. The first of those, that the revenue cycle includes fraudulent transactions. That one can generally be rebutted at local government bodies, which we have done for Waverley, so that we don't consider that to be a risk. The second one, the management override of controls, cannot be rebutted, and our work in this area generally focuses around estimates and journals. So our work on journals to date hasn't identified any issues in respect to management override of controls. We're just finalising writing that up, but we've got no issues that we need to bring to your attention for that. We then move on to the two risk areas that John has mentioned already in terms of big areas of focus where we've got work in progress. The first of those is the valuation of land and buildings on page 118. So as we've set out there what work we've done to date. And as John said, that work is still in progress. We have had some delays in getting responses to the audit queries from the internal valuer, but we are continuing to work through that as we speak. It's probably worth noting that we will be including an emphasis of matter paragraph within our audit opinion. That is in relation to the material uncertainty that's highlighted in the external valuer's report, but that is nothing to be concerned about, in that we would expect to see that in all of our audited bodies' reports from an external valuer. So that doesn't impact the opinion. The emphasis of matter is just drawing the reader's attention to that disclosure within the accounts. And that is something you will be seeing in everyone's audit reports. The next risk there picks up on the pension fund liability, and John's mentioned a couple of the issues we've got outstanding there. So McLeod again has arisen again as it did last year. So this is as a result of HM Treasury have made a proposal for a remedy for McLeod, and the impact of that needs to be assessed. So we're in communications with the council's actuary to determine the figures in relation to Waverley's accounts. And there was one other item that we're in communication with the actuary on, that's the experience item. So the experience item within the pension fund accounts relates to the fact that there's been a triennial revaluation carried out in the last 12 months. The experience item brings the figures up to date, if you like, since the last triennial revaluation. So you'd expect to see that experience item in all local government sets of accounts, but we do need to assess what makes up that figure and whether it is in line with our expectations. And we're waiting on the full breakdown of that information from the actuary. One other element of the pensions work that is in progress at the moment is in relation to the assurance from the pension fund auditor. So you'll be, any of members involved in the audits previously will know that we get assurances from the auditor of Surrey Pension Fund, and until that work is complete, we've had those assurances, we can't complete our work on the pensions aspect of the audit. So that work is still in progress. I'll skip past the next page and just continuing just on these key areas. So pages 121, 122 are looking in a bit more detail the key estimates and judgments around land and buildings. Firstly, in relation to council housing on page 121. So we've set out there what we've looked at in relation to the valuation of the council's dwelling stock. We did identify that when reviewing the movements in the valuation of the assets, that there hadn't been indexation applied to the council dwelling stock in the year. We challenged the valuer on the basis for this and the supporting evidence because it wasn't in line with our expectations or indeed the council's practices previously. The council have now decided to apply indexation to the value of the council dwellings, and as a result that is the adjustment that's highlighted in one of the appendices, which we'll come on to a bit later. So that is a material adjustment to the accounts that's been made. And we've highlighted there that the valuation experts need to be objective and separate from the preparation of the financial statements. And our audit identified some evidence that a member of the finance team on secondment appeared to have some involvement in the decision-making of the internal valuer. So we've also raised a recommendation in relation to that. Moving then on to page 122, then looks in a bit more detail at the rest of the land and buildings. That there's probably not much more to say on that at the moment. That, as I said, that area is still in progress at the moment. In particular, I guess that the final bullet point, we're in discussions with management on the evidence to support the value of properties that have not been valued in the year and the potential change in valuation that could result in. Page 123 then picks up on looking at the key estimates and judgments, looks at a bit more detail on the net pension fund liability. So for our work on this, we used PwC as our auditors expert. So PwC carry out an assessment of each of the actuaries, and we use the information that they provide to assess what has been supplied by the council's actuary and then fed through into the financial statements. And you'll see from the table there that we're happy that all of the assumptions that have been applied by Hymans are in line with expectations. So we have a green assessment on that. So a clean bill of health on that. Page 124 just picks up on going concern, which John mentioned. So we've got no concerns in respect of the council's application of, or the council's use of the going concern assumptions. So our audit opinion is proposed to be unmodified in that respect. We then, on page 125, some other matters that we need to communicate with you. I won't go through all of those. So we do seek confirmation requests from the council's counterparties. While we had a few hiccups in getting those through, from one in particular, we now have received all of those positive confirmations. So good news there. We've identified no material omissions in the disclosures to the financial statements, and we've had all the information and explanations that we've requested through. But as I mentioned before, there have been some delays in some areas of the audit, in particular early on, where we would need some detailed population breakdowns. So we have had some delays that have just made the audit not as smooth as we might otherwise have liked. Page 126 then picks up on some of our other responsibilities under the code. John's mentioned already the annual governance statement. So we have to look at and consider any other information that's published with the financial statements. That includes the annual governance statement and also the narrative report. And we're happy that there's no inconsistencies that we've identified. We did identify a couple of bits where the narrative report could be enhanced, and we've included a recommendation on that, but there's no inconsistencies or issues that impact on our report. Whole of government accounts, we don't need to carry that out as Waverley are below the threshold, and we would be intending to certify the closure of the audit when we do issue our opinion. There haven't been any issues that have come to light in terms of objections to the accounts or anything of that matters that would impact on us not being able to close the audit when we issue the opinion. The next section moves on to the value for money approach. So you may recall in the audit plan, we had two significant VFM risks that we identified. The good news in summary, as John said, is that we're satisfied that there are proper arrangements in place for securing efficiency, economy, efficiency and effectiveness, the 3 E's in the council's use of resources. Pages, let's get the right page reference for your, so pages 129, 130 set out in more detail the work we've done on the two risks that we identified. So the first one was around financial sustainability. So we set out there the work we've done, look at the council's budget setting process, in particular, obviously with the impact of COVID, we've looked at how the council reacted to that, the contingency revised budget that went through council in August, and the work that is ongoing in terms of the revision of, or looking at the medium-term financial plan as part of the recovery, change and transformation programme. So I think what we're saying is we're happy that the council's got suitable arrangements in place, but clearly there's a gap within the medium-term financial plan that will need to be addressed, and the work of the RCT programme is going to be crucial to determine how the council delivers its services going forward. The second significant risk was looking at the commercial property portfolio. So we identified this as it was an area that a lot of councils are moving into, and Waverley had intentions in that direction as well. So we wanted to have a look at what the arrangements were that the council had in place for due diligence, what legal advice had been taken. So we've had a look at that. As we've got no issues to raise at this time. The council hasn't invested any property outside of the Waverley area currently, but we're just flagging up. This continues to be quite a current topic in the fast-moving area for local government, and we're aware that the council is revising its strategy in line of the expected updated guidance in this area. Moving on, page 131, just quickly to confirm that we do need to communicate with you that we are independent, that we've got no independence issues or ethical issues that we need to bring to your attention. So page 131 confirms that, with page 132 then confirming in the areas of non-audit services. So we've set out there the grant certification of both housing benefits and the housing capital receipts grant, and also the independent examinations work that we may be doing later in the year. That takes us through to the appendices. So Appendix A is the action plan, so that picks up on the recommendations, some of which I've referenced earlier. So we've got the recommendations there along with the management responses. So management have accepted each of our recommendations. So I don't propose to go through those in detail unless anyone wants to pick up any queries on those. Appendix B, as John mentioned, picks up on recommendations from last year's audit findings report. So we've got the recommendation from last year was in relation to property, plant and equipment arrangements for valuation. And I think with some of the issues we've run into this year, our assessment is that some of the weaknesses or some of the issues we've identified there have not really been fully addressed. Appendix C then on page 136 picks up on audit adjustments to date. So the first table there picks up on the indexation of the HRA dwellings that was processed following our audit queries. So that resulted in an £8.2 million adjustment on the statement of financial position. The second table then picks up on some of the misclassification and disclosure changes, all of which have been amended in the revised set of accounts that you've got on the agenda. So as it stands, we've got no unadjusted misstatements. That's the next bit, Appendix C, so that's all good. Then final two appendices, setting out the fee positions. So we've got the proposed fee as set out within the audit plan. Clearly, with the audit still in progress, the final fee is to be confirmed at this stage. We will report back to you once the audit's been finalised and an updated fee position has been confirmed once we've reviewed inputs into the audit. And last but not least, Appendix D, for anyone who's interested, is the audit opinion itself. And I mentioned the emphasis of matter paragraph that we are including in all of the opinions. So on page 139 there, that is the final paragraph on the right-hand side there. So that is a fairly standard emphasis of matter paragraph, which is, as I said, just drawing the reader's attention to the disclosure of the material uncertainty within the council's financial statements. I hope it hasn't been too much of a whistle-stop tour, but happy to take any questions members have got.
Thank you, Mark. I have one quick question, and it comes back to the valuation of investment property. Would your findings, if you like, feed back into our attitude to risk, where we have a risk table, and that's included in there, our attitude to risk in investment property? Is there something now we can take from your valuation which might guide us on, say, modifying that risk attitude?
This is the commercial property investment.
Yes.
As I said, I think we're quite happy that the arrangements look fairly robust that the council have put in place on that. So I think it's the safeguards that we would expect to be seeing within there in terms of the various scenario planning, all the elements that feed into the decision making, and scrutiny that's going through that process. I don't think we've got any issues to raise in respect to that. So I think we're comfortable that as it stands, there are the robust arrangements in place for the due diligence around commercial properties.
Okay. No, I wasn't thinking so much about what's been put in place, like you say, the due diligence aspects. It's whether we should have or take on board a different view of what that risk ought to be going forward.
I think in terms of the risk that the council is prepared to take on that, I think this is a developing area with guidance expected out at the moment. So I think a lot of councils have gone shooting ahead in terms of investing outside of their immediate area, and that has led to the need to obtain legal advice as to whether they have the power, whether you have the powers to do what you're intending to do. And I think there isn't definitive view on this currently. So SIPFA and have been publishing documentation on this. I think the legal views seem to be given the impression that there's some room for manoeuvre potentially on that. I think it's something that the council needs to take into account, and it's doing the right thing in terms of looking at considering what the new guidance is going to be saying on this, because I think in particular it's looking at whether councils can borrow purely to invest when it's something that is outside of their area. So I think that's a key area of focus on this at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mark? We've got Councillor Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, clearly the major role of audit is to give us the warm feeling that everything is compliant and so on. But from your work on the audit, can you give us sort of two things that you were perhaps surprised to find, or things you thought should have been done, should have been done better?
I think on the pension side, I mean, we've highlighted John flagged up the two areas of focus that could impact on the accounts. I don't think there's any issues that there's nothing that the council could have done differently in terms of the pensions side of it at all. So I think that's very much out of the council's hands. That's in the hands of the actuary themselves. I think from my perspective, given the issues on the PP evaluations last year, I think it's slightly I suppose disappointing in that there was a recommendation in there last year around PP evaluations, and for that to be an area that we've had probably the most difficulties with this year shows that is an area that there still needs to be some work carried out on in terms of the way the council's approaching that area.
Okay.
And I think I'd sort of just say that it's about evidence in the professional opinions and judgments of the valuer to a way that there's an audit trail that we can use to support our audit responsibilities. That's the key area that we found a sort of key overall underlying issue there.
Towards the end, one of you mentioned that certain evidence took a long time coming. Was that evidence from this council, or evidence from outside the council?
Some of it was from the council, yes. So there were some difficulties in getting hold of. So what we need to do for our audit work is have it's key to have the right population that we test from in the first place, and there were some difficulties in establishing those populations in a few areas, and then the key delays, I suppose, really have been around the PP evaluations. So I try to keep harping back to that, but I guess that has been the key area that has caused the main problems throughout the audit.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. Just going back to the PPE issues, and you have identified issues previously. Are the issues you found in this audit work the same, or are they in the same area? What exactly have you discovered? I mean, and what sort of trend, what sort of things were you expecting that you haven't seen?
I wouldn't say that it's the same issues that we've found, and it is worth reflecting, I guess, that it is an area where, due to the increasing focus that there is from the FCA, our regulator, there is a continual raising of the bar in terms of the expectations, which is something that we commented on within our audit plan originally. So the scope and depth of work in that area is increasing year on year, if you like. So we're digging into more detail this year than we would have done last year. But having said that, there are some areas where it's not necessarily a new thing that we'd be looking at. So our assessment of PP for assets that haven't been revalued in the year, what impact that could have on what their value is in the balance sheet currently compared to what their fair value might be, that's something we would have looked at in previous years. So there definitely has, we're looking at these things in more detail, and it isn't this, we're not picking up the same issues as last year, but having said that, this isn't all new.
I'd support that. That last year was a very specific issue around how the valuation date was captured. This is more around the providing of evidence to support the valuations and the thought process of assets not valued in the year. So it's all within the general theme of valuation. So that would be our sort of conclusion back to you, is to say, well, for future years, invest time around that whole area, around quality assuring that whole area, and I think that's broadly been accepted by officers.
Yeah, just for continuing from that, I mean, you've made comments about supervision. You've made comments there about the internal valuer, professional valuations, and you've made comments about crossover of staff from finance to the valuation, getting involved in it. So a crossover in that. I mean, how serious are those comments? I mean, do you think there's a real process problem that we need to rethink and re-emphasize?
I mean, they are serious comments in that these issues have been, there's been issues around revaluation of PP raised last year. So the fact that we're making more recommendations in this area it clearly is an area that's going to need an increased focus from the authority. I think, I'm not sure in terms of like, when you say how serious it is, I mean, it's
the
not
council's
something...
not going to lose. The council's not going to lose money off the back of this. So I think you can be reassured there. It's just a highly technical area that you've got to get right in preparation for the audit for future years.
Okay,
Chairman, I think Graham Clark might want to come in on.
I've got him on the list. Yes. Councillor Ray, does that complete your question?
Oh, can I just continue on this point? What I was trying to get at there is, I'm not saying that there's large sums of money, but it's quite serious when an external auditor talked to us about segregation of duties. That should just bread and butter to us. Suggesting that we need more supervision is also quite serious in my view, because it flags up a risk and a risk area to me. I mean, are you happy with the management responses? Because the responses aren't very detailed, but I would have expected you to have got probably slightly more than we've got in the document. So are you happy that management have taken on board the points that you've raised, and that they are not going to allow this to happen next year?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. We're happy that management isn't complacent in this area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Got Graham Clark would like to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, could I just come back on a couple of points, starting with maybe the question about risk profile of property investment, and then I'll come back to PPE. So just a couple of things on this that we've looked at in the revised property strategy that was approved by Council in February. A number of risk safeguards built in there that weren't in there previously to do with professional advice, but also quite crucially around proportionality. And by that I mean the proportion of Waverley's net budget that it's prepared to receive from commercial income. And the council set an upper limit on that. And some of the criticism of local government and commercial investment has been around proportionality. So in other words, a higher proportion of the council's income is coming from the one source of commercial income, and that didn't sit well with some sort of observers of some councils. Now, Waverley's is well within our current limit at the moment, and by setting a limit, I think that in itself made a statement about our risk profile. Just come back on the PPE. I mean, yeah, thank you for the discussion on that, and clearly we've been working with John and Mark and the team the last few weeks, and I would support what John's just said, which is that myself and Peter Vickers are fully committed to looking at this area. There are a number of things that were already put in place. Peter's already worked with Vicky and Caroline, who's our qualified valuer, to re-examine their the whole sort of structure of the team and who does what. That's a pretty new setup in there, and of course the last few months have been very tricky, and actually avoiding some overlap between our professional staff over the last few months has been even more challenging than normal. I don't think the segregation thing, in my view, was a sort of a serious breach that put the council at risk. I think it was a sensible suggestion that we need to look out for that in future, and we absolutely will. And on the point of supervision, the first recommendation talks about a senior officer review and challenge of the work. Again, that's something you'll see from the notes that we've accepted, and that's just good solid management oversight that in normal working conditions is easier to do and has been, again, more challenging this year. So I think, yeah, I mean, we've, as you can see from our management responses to the PPE items in the annex, the recommendations, we've acknowledged that there's more that we can do, and we will, and we are doing that. And Vicky and Peter are both on the call, so they would have heard sort of members' comments and concerns, and we are committed to that. I think we've pretty much caught it okay in our responses. I accept the responses are fairly brief, but I think, you know, we didn't want to get sort of defensive or anything else, because, you know, we accept that there's some work to be done. So I think I'm happy with it, Chairman, where we are.
Thank you, Graham. I've got Councillor Hyman. Jerry.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, if other members, if members of the committee would like to go before me, if there are others, then I'm happy to defer, because it could save me saying something, you know, taking up the committee's time if they want to. Do you have any other hands raised, or are you?
Yes, I've got Councillor Seaborn. Perhaps you want to go first.
Let them go first, because they may well cover the issues I would otherwise take time on. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think I picked up on John and Mark's comments about how much longer it's going to take to complete the audit. I mean, I congratulate them on getting to where they've got to, given the current circumstances. I think it's a spectacularly good piece of work, both by our officers to get the financial statement out, and for the audit to have progressed as far as it has. But at some stage, we're going to have to make a final approval of the accounts, and I guess we can't do that until we've got the final audit statement in. So it'd be helpful to work out what our route to the final approval will be in terms of when we'll actually have that final audit statement. So that's a question. And then the other observation is that Grant Thornton very kindly put together the Appendix A, which is an action plan. And I think I'd quite like to suggest that we had a review of that action plan sometime before the next audit cycle starts to our work programme, just to make sure that we are on top of items and we don't have any recurring items next year. So that's a suggestion and a question to John and Mark. Thank you.
Mark, do you want to take the?
Sorry, John.
Yeah, Mark, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to take the completion timeline point?
Yes, so I think so. We've got so the in charge for the audit is working. So he was off last 2 weeks. He's back working on the audit this week. So we're trying to get everything now taken through to completion as soon as we can. That's clearly dependent on getting the outstanding information that we need, particularly around the PPE valuation items. That's something, as I said, we've been in discussions with Graham and his team today. So that is hopefully moving forward now. I think then it's a decision as was flagged up now in terms of what the next stage is in terms of. It's not our decision, I guess, in terms of the next stage of the process. So I think that's perhaps one for Graham to perhaps come in on, who's nodding, I can see.
I think, you know, it's probably about, depending on the speed of response, but three weeks. It feels like a 3-week period to get everything in and reviewed and finalised.
Graham, would you like to respond to that?
So Chairman, firstly, I think Councillor Seaborn's suggestion is a good one, that this action plan comes back before the committee, and that I think that I'd welcome that, to give that audit committee oversight. I think, yeah, in terms of options, I think Councillor Seaborn, you said, you know, where we go next. And obviously we're kind of spilling into the next item, which is the accounts, but I think that's appropriate for the purpose of this conversation. So, you know, you heard John and Mark's introduction, and I think, you know, this time, well, not this time last year, but this stage of the process, which happened to be in July, there was also a list in the audit findings report. I think it was a longer list actually of work that was still in the pipeline. But at that point, Grant Thornton gave a view to the audit committee about the position they were at the time and where that was likely to take us. And the audit committee chose the option of approving the accounts subject to, and there were certain words that I revisited this morning and shared with Fiona. And I think that was a sensible option. I mean, the other option is either you approve the accounts in a second with the sort of uncertainty around the incomplete audit, which I'm not imagining that you'll be minded to do. And the third one is, of course, you say, well, we don't think we're in a position to approve the accounts, and then you have another meeting at some point. Now, that's been much more challenging in the past because we've been pressing up against our statutory deadline. As John said, you know, we have got a bit of time this year. Where I hope that members will be, once you've considered the next item, is that you can draw enough assurance from the accounts and the training session that we did before today, and that there's enough certainty for you in the Grant Thornton report that you could take the same approach that you did last year and have a delegation. And the delegation, crucially, was subject to the chairman's satisfactory review of the Grant Thornton's final report. And so, in other words, if the chairman looks at what Grant Thornton write up in their final report and thinks, actually, I don't think this would satisfy the audit committee, then you have another meeting to go through it all again. So there is that safeguard built into it, but it means you don't have to have another meeting just for the sake of it. And so there are a number of options that we'll look at the end of the next item, but it's good to sort of rehearse them in the context of the audit report now. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Graham. We have Councillor Hyman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. There's a few little bits I've picked up on. I'm very interested, actually, as you would imagine, because it's something that Farnham Residents Party was based upon on page 15, which is 125 of the committee papers, where it says matters in relation to laws and regulations. You've not made us aware of any significant incidences of non-compliance with relevant laws, and we've not identified any incidences from our audit work. And I mean, I can quite imagine any organisation that an auditor goes to, the organisation is probably quite unlikely to step forward and say, yeah, we've been breaking the law on this, and you know, because of clarification of the law, we've been found that we've been acting unlawfully for many years, and we're going to confess to it or whatever. But I'm wondering to what extent I mean, I'm not doubting your statement whatsoever in any way. I'm quite sure that's absolutely true, that the officers have not made you aware of anything. I've questioned some issues myself, but so we can cover those under the AGS in a couple of items. But I was just wondering to what extent, Mark, you investigate such things yourselves as part of the audit, because obviously you're mainly financial side and as well as a bit of governance and risk. So to what extent do you investigate recent legal judgments in respect to things that are raised? I raised a motion to the council in December, to which I had responses which differed from the facts and the recent judgments in the courts considerably, and I wondered to what extent you might follow those up. Do you at all or not? So that's my first question. Just what should I expect of this, rather than because obviously you can't be expected to go into everything in depth, and you're not a law firm, you're auditors. If we move on to on page 19, which is 129 of the papers, first paragraph at the end and the beginning of the second paragraph, it says the council's not used the furlough scheme, but has incurred overtime costs. And I'm just thinking in terms of VFM and to assuage any residents or taxpayers' concerns, are there any records available of checks or investigations that have been carried out by Waverley or by Grant Thornton to ensure contractors haven't abused the furlough scheme? I've heard things myself on the grapevine. For instance, by not passing claim funds on to employees, or by reducing their services and their staffing levels, and so we're getting a little bit shortchanged ourselves in a way, but the firms are doing very nicely out of it. I know it's a national problem, and I don't know the extent to which we and you take any responsibility for looking at our contractors. Are any records available to evidence to confirm the accuracy of the overtime claims, or by which comparative productivity or efficiency or quality of office and remote working, home working can be reliably assessed, I suppose, across all of our employee base? The timesheets that you see or move to piecework, that might be a next year's audit rather than this year's, but it's still I think a valid question as to to what depths are Waverley or you looking at it at present. There's another issue as well. It says there that the council's stopped all recruitment and non-essential spending in interim measure in April. I was just wanted to confirm the accuracy of that, because I thought I recalled reports telling us as members a couple of months ago or three that not all recruitment had been stopped. There are exceptions and perfectly justifiable, I'm sure, but I just wanted to make sure that the statement that all recruitment and non-essential spending has been stopped, because I'm not sure we should say that if it hasn't, certainly. Then on page 20, so page 130, I guess, of the papers, the property investment strategy, I'm satisfied with what you said. I did think the last two paragraphs on there sort of repeated themselves and almost brought to mind the lady protesters too much, so to say. But you've explained yourself, and I think it's just a matter of, there are differing QC opinions out there, and we do have to be a little bit careful when we're taking legal opinions, because we had thought, a number of us on the committee last year and previous years had thought that perhaps we were moving on to thin ice. And of course, where there's room to interpret something, as there is in some of this law, then it is difficult for anyone to say who's right and who's wrong until someone turns around and says what we want it to be in future, if there are grey areas. I think that's covered everything that I picked up from it, because you put together a very, very comprehensive explanation for us. Thank you. But if you've got any thoughts on the questions I've asked there, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. Shall I give it a shot and then see how well I can cover them off? So, laws and regs. We get our assurance in various routes for laws and regs. And you're right, it can't be a 100% check. What we do is we seek representations. We seek representations from those charged with governance, from yourselves during the audit, but also through the management representation letter process around that sort of thing. We also meet with your statutory officers and formally ask the question as part of those meetings, are there matters that you need to bring to our attention? And the final piece that we do around that is minutes review and being familiar with the business that the council is involved in, and comparing that against areas of sort of common concern around compliance with laws and regs in a local authority context. Contractors' abuse of the furlough scheme, that's not our responsibility as part of your audit, because obviously you've not made use of that scheme. Interested in officers' observations around what the council itself is doing around that. It's certainly, as you're right to flag up, a hot topic at the moment. HMRC has been bringing to attention the sort of the perceived very high levels of abuse and fraud around furlough. The auditors of any private sector body that were applying furlough and may have inappropriately applied the rules will be looking for that sort of thing as part of their audit work, as they have the responsibility of looking at material misstatement due to fraud, and so they'll be following that through as part of their work. But I'm certainly aware of councils where they've been doing their own checks and their own sort of procedures around the abuse of furlough and how that might impact on the reputation really of the council. Stopped all recruitment. That was the information that we were given as part of our inquiries around the VFM. So I think that's probably one for officers to confirm either way. And on the property investment strategy, I think we sort of covered that off in discussions.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
Graham.
Chairman, thank you. Yes, and I'll just fill in a couple of the gaps, that information that will come from officers as opposed to Grant Thornton. So yeah, indeed, furlough. We did an assessment of furlough a few times throughout the lockdown period, and in fact, all of our staff were either fully deployed on their own services or they were redeployed. So everybody was fully occupied. Some were probably over-occupied. Yeah, as far as contractors concerned, actually most of our contractors were performing a full service. So both for our waste collection were, our grounds maintenance were, plus they helped out on some other areas of enforcement that we wanted them to. I'd need to check on some of the housing contractors. I think it was a mixed picture there. I'm not sure what Hugh's view on that was and whether there was any suspicion of abuse of the furlough scheme, but I can certainly catch up with him, because like Councillor Hyman, yes, I mean I've read the reports in the newspapers about the extent of fraud. I hope none of our contractors were. As I say, most of them were fully occupied. Places Leisure was the one that was most impacted. As a business, they employ 8,500 people. Their business of running leisure centres was switched off by the government and kept switched off for a few months. So they did furlough most people, and I think it would probably be hard to challenge that one for that period. And then they unfurloughed as soon as councils like us got agreement with them once they were allowed to reopen their centres to do so. A couple of things on overtime. I mean, Gail's internal audit service would routinely look at employment costs. The only overtime I think it's referred to in here, in fact, is in our COVID response, and that was very specific instances with management board approval, and that was mainly around processing business grants and also doing the welfare calls to shielded people in shielded residents all over the Easter weekend and a number of other weekends as well. And in fact, all of that overtime costs we've managed to recover from the government in COVID support grant, so no impact directly to our council taxpayers. If our Grant Thornton colleagues have said recruitment and non-essential spend, that's probably my fault for conveying it in that way. It's actually non-essential recruitment and spend, if you like. It's it's worded a slightly different way. So our judgment is about whether recruitment is essential, and in which case we make it an exception, but the default is not to recruit at the moment. And we have many posts that have been held vacant and not many exceptions made, but non-essential spend is still on hold. And we've now embedded that within our contingency budget anyway. So we've sort of re-established our baseline to work to. Chairman, hope that's helpful for Councillor Hyman. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham.
Chairman, can you just ask, because I don't really have any right to ask as I'm not a member of the committee, but just ask that the wording's corrected in respect of the last issue there, the staff recruitment, just so that it reflects what's just been said as opposed to what it says at the moment. Thanks.
Could you explain that, Jerry? What would you like it to say?
I think, Chairman, if I can interrupt, it's just to include the word non-essential recruitment and non-essential spend.
Okay.
It's yes, it's the opposite way around to what it says. It's non-essential recruitment and spend rather than recruitment and non-essential spend.
Okay.
That's all it is, and it was very easy to do, but it is a matter of accuracy, and it's nice to have it accurate if we picked up on it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, if there are no more questions of John and Mark, can we move on to item 11, which is the statement of accounts? And I believe Graham and Peter are going to introduce this item.
Chairman, yes, I will be. I'm just scrolling down to it on my iPad. So Chairman, the accounts is a long sort of technical document. A lot of the content is prescribed and set out in various statutory codes of practice, and for that reason, we held a session with Audit Committee members a couple of weeks ago to give the opportunity of going through and understanding the numbers. So the officers won't be going into a huge amount of detail tonight, but of course we can answer questions on any aspect of the document. So just to walk through the story here a bit, Chairman. Of course, we're normally here in July because we normally have a much tighter timetable to do the first stage, which is to publish the unaudited accounts. And this year, actually, we still managed to do that by the end of June. And I think that's credit to the finance team at Waverley, because Vicky, Rosie and the team did a remarkable job doing all of that in lockdown and remotely, and completely unexpectedly as well, because they had a timetable in March that was looking very achievable, and then all of that was thrown out, and we were a few staff down for various reasons. So well done to them. So at the end of June, we published our accounts, and then we submit them at that point for audit. And as is usual, during the audit process, we have a really detailed open dialogue with Grant Thornton, and things are identified, and we discuss as we go. And so Annex 2 to this report is a summary of the changes that Mark referred to that have been agreed and accepted along the way. Most of them are relatively small, but the material misstatement following the indexation matter is also referred to in there. And so all of those have been incorporated in the revised accounts at Annex 1. So basically, Annex 2 sort of converts the published statement that's been on the website for some time into the final version that we're putting forward for approval, which is set out in Annex 1. And so in terms of the other recommendations, there's a recommendation which is a letter of representation, which is a standard requirement of a local government audit process, whereby Chairman, you and I sign a statement on various aspects around the governance and the content of the final accounts, and we send that to the auditors as a sort of a formal record. And one other aspect I just wanted to mention was a going concern. I mean, clearly in what we have to do by law is give a statement on going concern. And in the past, that's been a statement very much around, well, you know, we're a local authority, we have a medium-term financial plan that's robust. Our services are all pretty sound, etc. Now, clearly with the whole COVID impact and not just the financial impact that's immediate on local authorities, but the longer term impact on local economies and indeed on the longer term financial plans as well. That section needed strengthening. So I'm not going to sit here and read through it all. I assume members have read it, but if members have any particular comments or questions about the going concern aspect, yeah, Peter and Vicky and I would be happy to get into a discussion around that, and Mark and John are still on the meeting as well, so I can maybe add something in there. But certainly what we've done on that is to listen to the professional body, SIPFA, and indeed Grant Thornton and the team have been going to their virtual seminars over the summer and picking up the flavour of what we should be saying in there to give audit committees sufficient assurance about us as a council being a going concern, and indeed our accounts being robust. So, Chairman, I'm going to sort of end it there rather than just sort of bounce back to the options that we talked about just now, because this is the item on the agenda where this committee is charged as delegated by the council with actually giving the final approval to our accounts. So it's very, very important. So they don't go on to council afterwards. It's very important that the committee are feeling, you know, comfortable and confident about the accounts, and particularly in the light of the audit findings report. So it is usual for there to be, at the time when we have this meeting, some outstanding matters of audit. And as I say, last year, because of pensions and a couple of issues on the asset valuations, there was a list that was at least as long as this one, and the committee agreed the approach of a delegation. So that is for the committee to decide. So I won't say any more on that, Chairman, other than just to set out those options again. So I think I'll hand over. The officers are here, the auditors are here. Chairman, if members have got any comments or questions, happy to try and respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. I mean, do you feel that this year we are much the same as we were last year? I mean, in terms of the outstanding items, because I remember you talking about this when we did this 12 months ago, that there was no real issue, the fairly minor things to complete. I've just got the impression from the comments at this meeting, perhaps it's not quite so trivial. What do you think?
I think we've actually got fewer. You know, I think we've actually got fewer points, but they're more sort of last year it was the issue that affected us at the very end of last year's audit was a very specific and sort of unforeseen issue, whereas this year we're not as far into the valuation work as we'd hoped to be, but the other areas of the audit are more complete.
But the valuation aspect will not have any significant, will not make any significant change to the accounts, not in terms of our...
It could make a difference to your accounts, but not to your bottom line, not to your general fund.
Yeah.
And Chairman, Peter, Vicky and I have been talking about this at length, and with Vicky too. And I think I'm confident we will be able to get to a satisfactory point with Grant Thornton in the coming weeks. And clearly, if we don't, and we will tell you that, and then if you do decide at the end of this item that you're happy to go with the delegation, that delegation will have that safeguard in that in the event that you're not satisfied that the committee would be happy to sign off, well then we will have another meeting. So I think in the event that we can't reach a good position with Mark and John and the team, then we would be coming back into the committee with Mark and John again to explain it all to you. So, but if that's avoided because we've been able to pull together all the outstanding evidence and reach a good outcome, then you will get a full explanation of that, Chairman, and you will decide whether you're happy to sign off that delegation or not, and then we'll share all of that with the rest of the committee.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Graham. Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Chair. John, if I can quiz you a little bit, please. The two outstanding issues, material issues that you raised, the property valuation and the pension fund, will they have any impact, or do you feel they'll have any impact on the tables in the narrative report? I'm thinking specifically of Table 1, Table 2, and the usable reserves.
Not on the usable reserves, no. No, these are featuring. These would feature on sort of unusable reserves, if anything.
And on the general fund and
Not on the general fund
and
no.
the capital spend.
No.
So it's essentially the numbers that we've got, if I read you correctly, in the narrative report are essentially unchanged. It's more of a technical issue which we'll be dealing with.
Yes, these are technical issues required by the fact your accounts are prepared under international financial reporting standards, not driven by the taxation reason for preparing accounts.
Okay, fine. Thank you. That's helpful clarification. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's fair to say to people who are listening to it that we've spent a lot of time going through these accounts and had the opportunity of questioning people. I'm sure that there's the odd comma or something else we might have missed that Councillor Seaborn hasn't picked up. But generally, it's quite impressive the amount of work that's gone into this and the way that the team has managed to cope with the difficulties of COVID. I don't have any detailed questions for the account because of that reason, but I would like to just go to the question of delegation. As this committee is delegated by full council to sign off the accounts, can we ourselves delegate the sign off to someone else, or do we actually sign them off subject to, and we delegate the clearance of the subject to? Could someone explain the latter to me, please?
Well, Councillor Gray, maybe I can start and Fiona will correct me. So I'm just trying to find the wording that came from the Audit Committee last time. Fiona, I don't know if you have it in front of you, do you?
I do, yes.
Okay.
So last year, sorry,
I interrupted you, beg pardon.
yes, last year the committee resolved that delegated authority be given to the strategic director, the Section 151 officer, in consultation with the chairman of the audit committee to consider any changes to the external audit findings report, and if satisfied with the report, to make any necessary amendments to the accounts and or letter of representation, and subject to this, approve the statement of accounts, approve the letter of representation, and confirm that the accounts had been prepared on a going concern basis. So effectively, the audit committee did approve, subject to the ability of the Section 151 officer and the chairman of the audit committee to make any necessary arrangements coming out of the final external audit findings report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm quite happy with that and brought up to date. I wasn't here last year, so that was just me catching up. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Could I just ask a simple question then? Would any member not be happy if we did exactly the same this year as we did last year, using the same form of words?
Councillor Wilson has his hand up. I'm not sure whether that's on his behalf or Councillor Davidson's.
Councillor Wilson.
This time around, it's me. I am content with the arrangements that we had last year, and I would recommend them. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I think then, Graham, it sounds like members are happy to go forward with the same process that we adopted last year for this year's accounts.
Chairman, thank you for that. And as John said earlier, we have a bit more time this year as well. I think last year we had about 2 weeks to sort of close that off and deal with that. So we've got time to properly engage and do it thoroughly. So thank you. I think that's very helpful to Peter, Vicky, and myself. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I just make one request? Could the committee be circulated once you've finally agreed the changes that were made, and that the committee be advised? Thank you.
Graham, can we do that?
Chairman, we can indeed, and in fact we did that last year, and as soon as we had that sign off, we circulated the sign off and the revised findings report and a summary of the changes to all members of the Audit Committee. And we'll do that again this time.
Thank you. Well, I guess that completes item 11, but we have a recommendation asked to agree the statement of accounts 2019-2020, subject to that condition that we just talked about. I guess we need to write that out in more words, but could you do that, Fiona?
Yes, Chairman. As I say, the recommendation now becomes to approve the statement of accounts for the financial year ended 31st of March 2020, approve the letter of representation for 2019-20, and confirm that the accounts have been prepared on a going concern basis, subject to a delegation to the Section 151 officer in consultation with yourself as chairman of the Audit Committee. Consider any changes to the external audit findings report, and if satisfied with those, make any necessary amendments to the accounts or the letter of representation.
Good, thank you very much. Is everybody happy with that recommendation?
Agreed.
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 Thank you all very much. Okay, we now move on to the annual governance statements, item 12. And again, Graham and Peter to introduce.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll give Graham a rest on this one, and I'll talk you through it. It's done the hard work tonight. So the annual governance statement sits alongside the statement of accounts, and it describes the governance arrangements in place covering the period of the account. So it's an overarching document around how the organisation's functioned, and this comes into the management responsibilities and detail that we've already discussed in previous items. So the arrangements are reviewed at each audit meeting, so that there's an item, the standing item on the agenda, which there is tonight, and there's a couple of speakers for that, where the governance arrangements, any concerns around governance arrangements are raised, and eventually they are considered, and then they end up in the report, which is the statement in front of you. So the format and content of the annual governance statement complies with the Delivering Good Governance in Local Authorities 2016 version, which is the latest version, published by SIPFA, although it doesn't follow the exact format, but the content aligns, and it's something that audit check out during the audit process. So the draft AGS was considered by this committee at the informal meeting that we had back in August, where we had a good look at a lot of the detail there. So that's the context. Councillor Seaborn did very nicely go through the detail in terms of the grammar and produced a schedule for us. That will be taken into account in the final version after consideration tonight. So over to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. I note that I think we mentioned this before at our earlier meeting, that the the SIPFA framework is essentially a financial framework, but good governance, of course, includes many other aspects. And I think I did mention at one time ISO 9000 as an equivalent set of guidelines for management processes, and whether or not at some point in the future the council might look at seeing if there are elements of ISO 9000 that can be brought into the governance, not perhaps in a way that you would want to look for accreditation, but at least to follow the general principles. Is that something you think would be worth following up in the future? Peter,
Chairman, sorry, Chairman, is that too, okay? Yeah, so it's clearly something that, if that helps process and provide structure for the organisation within which to work and consider governance and the way we manage, then as long as it's adding value to the organisation, then it's something that's worthy to be done. So we're certainly open to considering that.
I mean, I think this stemmed from my own point of view from, and it's a little hobby horse about things like document registers and identification numbers, let's say. I'm never quite sure when we see a document whether it's a revised document or whether it's, which version it is, because the same document gets issued in a number of forms often. So again, it's the same part of that management process. It's a trivial issue, but it's something which I think would form part of an ISO 9000 way of doing things.
It's a fair consideration and observation that you make, that document control can be challenging in an organisation such as Waverley, and we do have some methodologies, and we have SharePoint to help us with that. But as you see, it can be challenging, and it can have consequences too around versions of documents that are published and in different committees' hands.
And then just a minor point on page 6 of the statement. I noticed when we talk about habitats regulations, following a concern raised by a councillor, strictly it's probably a number of councillors. I mean, I have a concern, as I mentioned before, that we don't follow the legal requirements of having the relevant documentations at planning meetings, for example. It's again a trivial point, but as we mentioned before, I have raised that with Zach, and it's something I'd like to see if we can introduce that as soon as possible, really.
Chairman, should I just pick that one up, because you mentioned that to me at Chairman's briefing. I have spoken to Zach since, and Zach has responded. He is going to review that with Beth, because I think you mentioned 3 aspects that you would expect to see in planning reports and evidence. I think it was environment, habitats and biodiversity, and I did raise that with Zach, so you will get a response from him and Beth, and I'll chase him up on that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this section for Peter, for members?
Chairman, Councillor Hyman's registered to speak on this item, and then I've got Councillor Gray and Councillor Seaborn with their hands. Okay,
can we say Councillor Gray then?
Sorry, I thought you were doing Councillor Hyman, so apologies for that. Just going back to the governance statement, again, I think we've spent quite a bit of time on this and you've reviewed it. I do think that going back to your points of concern about the ISO standards, Finance have done very well with putting document numbers and version controls on. There was a lot of debate a few years ago around the area of GDPR, etc. And there's a lot of good reason to have documents properly numbered, properly dated, etc. Not just so that if councillors drop them, they can actually put the piles of paper back again. Doesn't affect you if you're having an iPad, but as you know, when you have large meetings like this, you can get an issue with it. We also have the issue where if you search Waverley's website, public website, you're likely to get a document that isn't the latest document, and you can't tell because if the document hasn't got proper document control, you don't know which one you're looking for. So I think it's extremely important as part of governance. And equally, I think in view of what we talked about in terms of reference, it would be nice if we could capture our governance framework in such a way that it explained all the components, parts of it, where it actually took place, what was the roles of various committees, etc. And I think that's I'm not putting my hand up to do it all, but I'd be very happy to start off something like that. And I've done it before for other companies that have been looking to get an accreditation, either 9001 or one of the quality and security qualifications, which require the same sort of discipline. But it would be nice if we could turn around and point out that's where it's going wrong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. I fully agree with you. We have perhaps Councillor Seaborn before Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. And yeah, it's good to see that the comments I sent in had been noted, and most of them were actually trivial, but there are a couple of points that were suggestions, and it's not for me. I can suggest things, but actually the committee needs to approve them. So I think we just ought to air them before any changes are made, or not, as the committee wishes. So I did suggest under item 5.3, where it said the council adopted a property investment strategy, that we insert something along the lines of an updated property strategy, or possibly a revised property strategy, because the way it read previously sort of intimated that there wasn't one, whereas the council has been running a responsible property strategy for quite some time, and I know a lot of work went into a version that was approved in April 2018. So if I could suggest that we had just that one word, updated, to make it clear that this is part of an ongoing process rather than something that is new, as is intimated by the words as they stand. That's one point. And then under other issues at the foot of page 6, I raised this at our workshop, and we've already discussed it this evening, that we have a potential ambiguity in the terms of reference of audit and standards in relation to the Constitution. So making absolutely no judgment about where this will end up. It is an outstanding governance issue, and it was raised during the year under discussion in this governance report. So I would suggest that under other issues, we should at least mention that that is out there. So it is captured, and hopefully this year we will resolve it, and then that will demonstrate good governance in recognising an issue and closing it out. So I'd like to suggest that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Are those suggestions taken on board, Graham? Yeah, good, thank you.
Yes, no, definitely, yeah.
We have Councillor Hyman.
Yes, thanks, Chairman. This one I was particularly interested in because of what it says in respect of the air quality and the habitats, which I've said a lot about over the past 15 years or so. So, I certainly wouldn't be happy to see the AGS signed off with the wording as it is, because it simply isn't true in some respects. I think these are matters which are very much in the news at the moment. We had Mr. Attenborough, sir, on the telly last night, and that we've had issues of compliance with international law and whatever all over the news. And Boris stood up and said everyone, nobody's above the law, didn't he? Not even him, supposedly. I think, though, it is an opportunity for us, and we have to entice or force Natural England to provide the evidence that's necessary for us to be compliant with the strategy we've got. I mean, if I start off, though, with the air quality issue, very quickly, in 2010, the 29th of November, Waverley issued a Regulation 19 notice. It's a legal notice under the EIA regulations to Crest Nicholson, which was requesting further information without which it would be unlawful to grant consent. That's the was the purpose. It's now regulation 26 because they've stuck some more in. I thought 25 is 26. This was agreed by the air quality officer and the borough solicitor and signed by Elizabeth Sims, the driving control manager. And the wording of it said there's a lack of clarity in respect to the effect of the phasing of the Royal Deer traffic lights. There's no modelling of how this junction will operate, and the in combination effects of the two proposals has not been assessed. And despite the fact that that has never been done, and at the end of last year, I at last managed to get a meeting with Surrey at which they proved that they were unable to provide any modelling, and that, you know, it simply doesn't exist. We do have an issue there, because that is the background, the basis of our air quality action plan, the basis of all our air quality work. We don't have an air quality action plan as such, a real plan that is costed and scheduled still, and this is 12 years on from when we should have had it and tried to put one in place. So, you know, this really does need to be sorted out, because of course when you've got air quality officers who find that they're constantly frustrated by planning and the executive, perhaps whatever, deliberately creating congestion, negating the purpose of the law and the air quality action plan and their jobs as officers, then you know, we have got to look at that, because our air quality officer referred to in here in this financial year we're looking at did say that there was political pressure there, and of course we know who was prosecuted for it, but you know, simply when a developer has told us they have modelled something as the government and Surrey County Council required in ceramics, and they actually didn't do it and gained planning consent for £115 million development that way, and it's still ongoing, and it's now being put off, so it looks like they'll get away with this, and what residents would not consider very clever or very nice. It's rewarding very bad behaviour. We need to look at that. So that's something I think I would very much hope you'd ask that we can have a little further investigation into, and get a couple of assurances or something, so that we're not stitching up our residents, because all of this, according to the officer report, it is about serving our residents and doing things in the residents' interest, and it's not in the residents' interest to reward that sort of behaviour in major planning applications. The other one, of course, is as you say, the habitats issue, which it would be very nice to clear up now, because we know we've had the Crundle judgment. I've sent that to some of our officers in planning issues, and I've raised it at a number of planning meetings of late. The Crundle, which is our Crundle just up the road, where our Farnham Mayor comes from as well, is what they say in that one is that it simply confirms that paragraph 77, that the judgment which councils, Natural England and the Joint Strategic Partnership Board have relied upon for the past 12 years or more is not lawful. They said it's a not good law. It is overturned. Now, after I brought this committee to council, put in a motion to council into the December council meeting, I did receive a response in early January, which brought up, covered the two issues. Firstly, saying that we don't have, where the question was, do we have an appropriate assessment? The answer was that some lawyers we paid a while ago said, yes, we have. Well, that's not an answer, because we haven't, because it would be produced otherwise, and we know that. The question's been asked enough times. There is no assessment of the mitigation, and we need to force Natural England to provide what evidence they've got, so that we can assess the level of development that we should be putting in place and do things lawfully that way. And the other question, the other response that I got back in early January was that this did not overturn the Sweetman People Over Wind judgment. Did not overturn the Herts Dilly Lane, which the delivery framework and our avoidance strategy relies upon, Chairman. So Obviously, that's wrong. There's a misconception there in our lawyers or our executive somewhere along the line, and we do have to clear this up because it can't go on forever. And we've got a local plan part 2 coming up very shortly. We can make a few changes that would be great news for residents and for the council, sort out a lot of the planning problems and the problems we have with the planning inspectorate. So I'd very much like you, if you can, to look at how we can just address those issues before signing off this AGS. Thank you, Chairman.
Signing off the AGM? Signing off.
It's the annual governance statement, which is what we're talking about here, before signing this off, which has got those things which are not entirely factually correct, if I can put it that way. Then obviously I would prefer that in some way, I don't know whether this is meant to be signed off, but the situation is that the person I worked with years ago doing this was your better half. Back in 2006-7, she's well aware of this, and I would not want her, as a conscience of our council and someone who I dragged into this in the first place, to be tarred with the brush that I've been tarred with for years when I've been proven right. And we need to, and also our leader also would be signing this, and I don't want him to sign something that's not factually correct.
We're running over 2 hours long, this meeting. Jerry, I don't think this is a question, an issue that we can answer at this meeting. It has been raised many times, and I'm very sympathetic with the comments you make, but I don't think it's our role in this meeting to discuss that. I don't know where we take this further forward. I mean, the obvious answer to me would be to take it to the borough solicitor for his comments and views. I don't see
that's not a solution.
Well,
in this instance,
because
obviously what the law has said is that the advice we've received from Waverley solicitors has not been correct for the past 12 years. So, and as I've said earlier in the meeting, we simply can't expect our staff to turn around and admit that Waverley has not been complying with the law for all this time. It's something they can't do, and we do have to force it. Obviously this was inherited by our staff. It's all historic. It's not them. But we do have to do things right because we've got the legal framework, which we, with our constitution, we cannot allow it to continue as it has been doing.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
As I said, I'm not prepared to do it now. We're too late. We've got other items still to consider. If this says something that you wish to pursue at a future meeting, then maybe that's the way forward. But I think I'll have to close this down now. I'm sorry about that. I don't think we can take this one further forward. Let me follow where we're getting to. So, okay. Let's move on to item 14 then, which is review of the progress in the implementation of the internal audit.
Mr. Chairman, could I just raise a point of order? Do we not have to sign off the annual governance statement approved at this meeting?
We need to just recommend it, I think. John and Tom have to sign it off.
Yeah, sorry, we've got to recommend it or approve it. They've got to.
You're right. Apologies. Okay, there's a recommendation here. We're asked to agree the annual governance statement for the 2019-2020 period. Are the committee happy to recommend this statement?
With the additional thought from which was raised by
Councillor Seaborn.
Councillor Seaborn. I can't remember who did it. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, Chairman, we could add at the end with the inclusion of the changes identified prior to the meeting by Councillor Seaborn, if you like, and then
yeah.
Is that okay? Is that right, Fiona?
Yes, agree with that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Sorry. Jumping over item 13, because we've just been discussing that with Councillor Hyman. I assume, Jerry, that there's no other issue you want to bring up on item 13, the potential governance issues?
Thank
you. No. Let's go on to 14 then. this is the internal audit agreed action. Gail to introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The agenda item number 14 relates to internal audit agreed actions that have either not been implemented within the time period or they're due to be implemented by the end of this month. As you can see from the report, there are a few outstanding recommendations relating to planning, replanning enforcement and planning fee income. Some of these are obviously, well, some of these are replicated as a responsibility, joint responsibility between ZAC and also finance. So therefore they're under Peter Vickers. And I know the teams are working together to resolve these. And as to how far they have actually got, these haven't been updated onto the Pintana system. So they might not be reflecting the current position of all the recommendations, but until they're actually updated in Pintana, I present the report to the committee in the format that it's now in.
Thank you.
Chairman, sounds like a cover-up.
Sorry?
I think it's an offline comment.
Oh.
So no, you can't add to this at all then, Gail. This is what it is.
This is what it, yes, this is what it is. And of course, some of the officers, obviously because we've had the COVID-19, some of the officers have been taking leave, etc., but they haven't been updated. So this is, as I say, this is how it's come off the system as it is now.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. We'll pick those up next time then. Okay, that is, you know.
I think we just need to accept the recommendation as well.
Yes, the recommendation here is that the committee considers the information contained and following discussion identifies any action it wishes to be taken. So there are no actions to be taken. So do we agree this report?
Sorry,
Agreed.
Chairman, I've got Councillor Gray with his hand up.
Say again, sorry.
I've got Councillor Gray with his hand up.
Yes, yes. Trying to look at too many things.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, this is something that has come up before, but you've got a whole series of things there with 0% achievement. And I think certainly we should lay down the fact that we want a full explanation of this by the next audit meeting. This is an important area. And I think they are going to be overdue, and the historic practice has been then to agree an extension. At the moment, I don't think we can agree an extension because we don't know where they are. But I think we should have this reviewed in full at the next meeting. We don't have time tonight to go into it in much more detail, but that would suggest that to you.
I think that's a good idea. Yes, can we ask for that to be done?
Yes, and does if the officers have actually then implemented the recommendations before the next audit committee, you still want an update on the status of those recommendations?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, if they've done it, that would be reported, won't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
An incentive for them to do it, Gail.
Yeah.
Yes. I think it's a matter of priorities as to when they come back from leave and dealing with other issues. But you are quite right. There are important recommendations that they have agreed on the implementation of.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll take that on board.
Yeah, so in that case, we do have that as an action. So can we recommend this report with the action that we've just discussed? Can we recommend that?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Wilson has his hand up as well. Councillor Gray, is that an old hand or have you got something else to add? Just Councillor Wilson.
I've just lowered my hand. Thank you.
So it's Councillor Wilson.
I was just going to say that I feel that the officers who were probably going to do these tasks have been working extremely hard in this environment with COVID and doing a really remarkable job. So I don't think we should punish them. I think we should say, get on with it as soon as you can, please.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Okay.
And Councillor Seaborn, sorry.
Yes, Councillor Seaborn.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I'd just like to endorse what Councillor Wilson has just said. It worries me that some of these actions are quite serious, but there are also long actions that have been long-standing, if you like. You know, they've been identified around things that have been an issue for some while, and we've got a new head of service who's come in very, very difficult circumstances. So I totally agree with Councillor Wilson. You know, it should be no element of punishment here. It should actually be trying to tease out whether the head of service has the resource to take care of these issues in the short term, and if not, you know, recommend helping him. So, you know, Councillor Gray is absolutely right. This is a serious issue. We need a report back, but we need also to be tolerant and sympathetic to the circumstances. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, if you would allow me to come back, I'm very tolerant. I'm very understanding, but they've got a simple task, which is to ask for an extension, and then Gail will put it on the report. So they should go and take that on board and come back and say, realistically, when can they achieve this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, any more on this action? This item, no. Let's move on then to item 15, which is review the progress in achieving the audit plan. Page 285 to 302. Gail again to introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, the Annex 1 provides an overview as to the current position of the audit plan and the progress being made. And I won't go through all the pages, but obviously what is of importance is on page 297, where it gives an indication as to the progress that's been made regarding those reviews that have had the audit outline agreed, where the date for starting has actually been has started, and those where we've actually had draft reports. Again, bearing in mind the circumstances would be then regarding COVID, there has been a slow start, and my plan is to, before the next audit committee in November, to actually reassess as to whether myself and the contractor, whether we've actually got sufficient time and availability to actually complete everything we already have in the plan. But my plan is to bring that to the audit committee in November. And one other element I wanted to point out, as a suggestion of, I think it was Councillor Seaborn at the last audit committee, I've now included in section 8 the budget expenditure, or the budget for internal audit, including the contractor, so that the audit committee are aware of as to how this expenditure is going throughout the year.
Thank you, Gail. Are there any comments or questions for Gail on this item? Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask, Gail, I mean, given you're operating entirely remotely in this process, is it very different to how you would normally do it? You know, sort of bursting into a room and demanding all the paper be given to you, or is it? I don't. You just rely on people sending you stuff, really, in order to do it in this situation?
Yes, generally in this situation, I have to be prepared. I have to make sure that I'm asking for hopefully all the information as much as possible at one point, but then obviously it does depend on when you're then digging down. There is then other information I then have to request. But I think the most difficult element being is because we are all remote, is actually ensuring that the information I'm asking for is actually available in an electronic form. Because again, on sometimes when you're asking for reports regarding where things have been signed off, and some things are still physically being signed off, that is then having to be scanned in. And of course, sometimes staff don't have that availability straight away for it to be scanned in. And it may be that one day a week, staff may be going into the office to do that. So therefore, there's sometimes a time delay in getting that information. And I'm sure external audit must have found that would have been an issue as well. So it's not just really down just to the work that I'm doing, because we do share information quite a bit throughout the organisation, from one service area to another as well. So I think it's a matter of patience. It's not that the information's not there, it's just being patient, waiting to get it. But your point regarding bursting into a room, at the moment, if I burst into a room, there'd probably only be 2 people there.
Yes.
like there was today when I was in this morning. But yes, it is quite surreal in a way, to the fact that the building is not as occupied as what it used to be.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Gail. We have a recommendation that the committee notes the contents of the internal audit progress report as attached. Okay.
Noted.
Great.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, item 16, the recurrent annual work programme, pages 303 to 304. Simply to note, anybody wishes to make a comment on this? Nope. Okay, thank you very much. Item 17, there are no items to discuss in exempt. Therefore, I can say, I can declare the meeting closed. Thank you all very much. I apologise for the late evening.
Well, there's been much to discuss.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, everyone.